Hard Turn is presented by Overlake Medical Center and Clinics.
Life is full of big moments of change and transformation where we have to pivot on our path.
Those moments come with a wide variety of emotions, from fear and anxiety to joy and relief.
I'm Kelly Koopmans.
And I'm Mary Nam.
And this is Hard Turn.
Welcome back to Hard Turn with Mary and Kelly.
You came back for another.
It's episode 3. We're marching along, Kelly.
Are we in flow now? Is this what the kids are all calling flow?
I think so.
Oh, yeah.
Even though it's a more mature flow, it's still
sure,
flow.
Exactly.
Episode 3. I am so excited about this. Connie Thompson, a long-time anchor and reporter in Seattle.
Legendary.
We're talking over 4 decades of experience. And she retired a couple of years ago. And if you know Connie, one might say it was kind of a surprise because Connie, I associate Connie with work, one of the hardest working people I know. And she was here in the newsroom digging, looking up stories. And so when she announced her retirement, it was kind of, wow, Connie's really stepping away. She's moving on to the next thing in her life. And we recently sat down and talked about her retirement. How does a woman who has worked for so long and at a pace of constant go, 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 suddenly turn that off?
And in a very public way.
Yes.
Her job to so many people who she doesn't even know defines who she is in their perspective.
And that was one of the things we talked about. And that was one of the hardest things she said she had to do. And we talk about hard turn. What happens when you stop doing the one thing you have been doing for the majority of your life since you were a young woman? And now you're 60 plus and you are ready to walk away. What happens? It's crazy to think about. But you think of work as a job. It's not until you've been doing it for a few years that you suddenly realize, wait a minute, if I keep doing this, this is how people see me.
It's the one question everyone asks when you're at a party. What do you do? You know, in our culture, what you do defines who you are. For the good things and the bad things that brings along with it. But, you know, that's why that's such a defining question when they first meet someone, when they ask.
And we're told to kind of embrace that, but at the same time, know who you are. But it was really interesting what she had to say about what it was like to confront that head on when she woke up and didn't have to come into work anymore.
How do I define myself so that I can still have a comfortable definition of myself when I am no longer doing what I have done for most of my life? And I think that's a key thing a lot of people don't do. We're so obsessed, especially in this country, with what do you do, that we define ourselves by what we do. And when you retire, you don't do that anymore, so who are you?
It really made me think about, that when she said that, I felt myself pause.
And what thoughts came to your mind when you thought about how you define yourself?
You know what's funny? I felt so much pressure in that second because I was aware of what I was thinking about, and just like, who am I? Why don't you know this quickly? Why can't you answer that question? It's your own life. Don't you know yourself? Turns out it requires some time and reflection.
And that's probably a healthy thing. If you have the answer a little too immediately, maybe you look at things a little bit more.
How do you see yourself?
I think it kind of depends on the moment and that season of life. I think if you were to ask me very early in my career, I knew exactly I'm a television journalist and I'm going to travel the world and do the stories. And every time that phone rings, I'm going to answer it and come in and do the extra shift and do the extra thing. And as life goes on, it remains a core part of who you are. But then you add other pieces, other ingredients into the mix, if you will, if you're baking a cake of life. Throw a couple kids in there, a husband in there, other life circumstances. And those things start to kind of conflict with each other. And that's what I think when you get to that very point that you're talking about, that requires reflection. What is it that's going to rise to the top of that list? Is it what I put most time into? Because for a lot of us, time is work.
Yeah.
We spend the most of our time, a lot of it here. Or is it where my heart is? And that's where it gets conflicting, different ego things come in there of, am I a journalist, a mom, a wife, a friend? And how do I prioritize all that?
Sometimes I think the confusion and the sometimes even guilt comes from this construct that we built about all of these topics that we're talking about. But that's not real. Like, that's not the standard metric because you can't balance everything. Because you feel like, okay, if I take on this role, if I'm going to focus on my family life, if I'm going to focus on being a parent, if I'm going to focus on being a career woman, you feel like if you're going to focus on one thing, then that means you're taking something else away from a different bucket. But that's not how it works, is kind of how I have come to see it and accept it. Because there's no such thing as doing it all.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist.
And yet, at the same time, I can see how difficult that would be when you actually take one of those pieces away. You take the work part out of the equation.
Right.
And you're left thinking, is what I have left in this bucket enough to still say it's full?
Well, my cozy calendar would tell you that it's full. That's what I've come to realize. And it's not so much are you doing it all as it is really are you doing your best? And my best isn't going to look like your best, and your best isn't going to look like my best, and it wouldn't even fit. It wouldn't even work because you have different needs. Your family has different needs. Maybe you have different career goals, you know? And we have such a hard time letting go of some things as we make that shift or hard turn into the next chapter of our lives. And what I was thinking about with Connie when she talked about the whole retirement and identity, such a light bulb moment, and I'm almost embarrassed to tell you this because it's so simple. You don't have to wait for retirement to deal and answer that question, right? It's like every little next chapter in your life is that point that makes you think about, oh, who am I now?
Depends on the season of life.
Right. Maybe you want a career change. Maybe, you want to have a child or grow your family. Maybe you want to move out of state and put on a different hat and do something else. I mean, does that mean you've let go of something significant that makes you look at your life in a negative sense? I don't think so. It's just a shift.
And
It's
just because you make a change doesn't mean everything that you've accomplished until then is a moot point. You still did it. It was a big part of your life, a big achievement, if you're proud of it.
Yeah.
And then you fill it with something else. So I'm very excited to hear what Connie has to say about how she was feeling about that day where she was no longer going to work.
One of the really interesting takeaways that Connie talked about, though, was when she made that turn and shift, she was now a retired person, it was getting to know her family again. Because we spend so much of our working hours, awake hours away from family, she had to reacquaint herself with her husband again. And it was a little harder than she thought.
I will say for us, it's been great because it gives you a chance to sit down and really realize what you didn't know about each other because they were off doing their thing. Yeah. And we've talked a lot about how your work family is a family. You get reacquainted with your real family more. And you see things you might have missed or you just pay more attention. And that's been good because, again, I talk about growth because we're still growing and helping each other grow. And it's like, wow, I missed that. And geez, no wonder he was always saying, what do you want to do for dinner? Because he'd had his day and he's trying to make sure that it's something that will be good for me. And I'm thinking, I've been thinking all day. I've been making decisions all day. I don't want to make another decision about a meal. And I'm able to learn more about, he's coming from a different spot. He knows I've been working hard. He wants to know what I want for dinner. Yes. So it's, and I think people, even with their children, you have time to see more about how things fit, or maybe things were just kind of sliding together and not fitting. That's been great.
When she said, see how things fit, Kelly, I was thinking to myself, and I do this, I go home and I kind of think when I plug myself back into the family life and home life, there's a part of me that feels like, well, now this is going to get done because I'm here. Mm-hmm. I'm not directly thinking that. It's just how I feel. I guess what I'm saying is, no, they have been doing their thing before you got there. Mm-hmm. The earth never stopped moving. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. It resonated with me when she talked about your kids and you're plugging back into that moment. And I think for me, we mentioned off the top, so much is structured around having to go to bed early.
Sure.
And I can't help that after a work day, and maybe this is similar just for people who work every job and every hour, you planned it out. Okay, so we're going to come home, we're going to do pickup, we'll have a little time for play, then dinner, and you're mapping it out, and it becomes such a routine that it can be easy to miss all those little moments.
Oh, those moments.
Because you're structuring it so much around what time bedtime is so that you can start work again. And that can cloud things compared to if you were retired, a time where you have less structure, where you can take in those little beautiful things rather than trying to cram them all into a very specific timeline and structured because it works for work, which can be really frustrating.
It's all about the awareness and the perception, but we just don't have time. That's what it feels like. We just don't have time to think about all those things and those special moments because in my mind, I'm already 2 hours ahead to what bedtime needs to look like.
That's what I think the daunting thing about retirement, to bring it just to this whole concept. It seems like such an abyss of time that do I trust myself to be able to cope without that structure and something that I feel like is physically anchoring me every single day that I can build on. Whereas when I think of retirement, sure, it sounds great to think I'd be having a house in Palm Springs or Scottsdale and golfing.
Golfing
with
all the time.
all my old friends and playing pickleball.
Oh, yes, and posting all those pictures of what retirement should look like.
And yet, could I sustain that every single day? And is that even what it looks like when your whole world has changed after decades of having that exact structure that she was just talking about?
So in retirement, what Connie saw on social media really took her back a little bit because it wasn't an accurate portrayal of what something looks like.
And I think especially now with technology, we're so groomed to, oh, they're on a trip. Oh, they got new shoes. Oh, they're having fun. Oh, they look pretty. Oh, they, especially our younger people, you're associating the quality and the success and the happiness in your life, and, there are books on this, with this external stuff that really doesn't make a difference. And the money and all of that stuff doesn't matter. So, before I die, I'd like to know that I achieved being content and happy and a positive influence, even though I know that life is never going to be perfect. There are always going to be challenges, and everybody has them.
She thought in retirement, all those happy moments would just naturally come about. At least that's what it looks like on social media sometimes.
Oh, she thought it would be
in media,
the golf
in
and
general.
the sunshine
sure.
and the trips.
Yes, and there was a lot of that. There is some of that, but there's still a lot of downtime for someone who would work so much for so long.
The thing that I think when it comes to social media, I heard, are you familiar with Esther Perel?
Yes.
And one thing that she talked about is AI and not artificial intelligence, but artificial intimacy, and how that has created this artificial sense of connection with people on social media. Artificial as we're not having these types of conversations face to face. We're not with each other's children or experiencing all that little stuff, but it's all a click, a tap, and we feel, okay, I got a like from that person. We're good. Our friendship's good. But as opposed to the end of the day, just like she was talking about, when you think about, you want to be a good person, you want to feel fulfilled. And the thing that fills my cup more is the one-on-one interaction in person. And I think the difficult thing is that social media makes you feel like you're connected to other people, but it's such a basic kind of surface level. And I think there are great things that come from social media. There can be great community that's built. But I also think it needs to go that one step further. Find that person, have a great conversation with that person, and interact.
And that's what she was talking about, was to be aware, because if you're not aware of what social media is doing to you mentally and emotionally and how it helps you define your identity, it's happening without your knowledge, and you're just on autopilot. So when that moment in your life, that hard turn happens, you realize, oh, I don't know how I feel about this. I don't really know who I am. I'm not secure with what I'm doing or how I feel about myself.
At Overlake Medical Center and Clinics, we offer the full spectrum of care for every stage of life. And with our skilled and compassionate physicians and care teams, it's so much more than a place to get better. It's where you can achieve a lifetime of good health. Welcome to Overlake, where your care is our passion. For more information, visit overlakehospital.org.
So was Connie second guessing how she was feeling, like if she was doing retirement right?
Not so much second guessing, but more of it exposed how little she was aware of who she was in this new chapter. Because it's easy to fall back on your job identity. It's so easy. You just give them your business card.
Right.
You still have a business card, and that's who you are.
Yes.
That little card says so right there.
But then you have to examine that a little bit more
Yes.
when you take that out of the equation.
One intriguing, really interesting, and funny aspect about retiring was having to look at herself, Connie says, in the mirror. She said aging in retirement, it goes hand in hand. People typically retire after the age of 60, sometimes in their 70s now, and coming to grips and coming to terms with who she was and how she looked in the mirror and how it felt. And she realized aging isn't a bad thing, but it was not a conclusion that she reached right away.
One of our colleagues here said, it's just, I'm so tired of people looking at age as a bad thing. I mean, look at our society right now. You don't respect the wisdom, the knowledge. Your brain trust is all in what you know and can share. You don't throw that out of the window because of some wrinkles. Right. But you can still embrace the growth and the promise that comes with youth. Now, for me, you combine that. So when you talk about going through our retirement, we're also aging. My husband is 78 now. Holy cow, we're still kids. Yeah. And at this recording, I'm 71. Mary, I don't know how I got to be 71 years old, but I hope that I can be a healthy, happy 75-year-old. Yes. Because if I am going to bemoan aging, I'm bemoaning living, and I'm not going to cut half my body off and inject myself with things to a point just to be the exterior personification of what somebody else thinks is acceptable. I want to be a healthy old woman.
When she said that part about if I'm going to bemoan aging, you're bemoaning living, that stopped me in my tracks mentally because she's so right.
Mm-hmm. What was it in your experience that made it hit so hard?
Well, how honest she's being. And we're having a deep but relatively lighthearted conversation about retirement. And she's talking about death. And she's talking about her age and her husband's age. And the reality of it hit me really hard. And also her honesty and her grace about it. She's so tired of people talking about aging in a negative way. And they're not talking about all of the incredible parts that come with it. The brain trust, the wisdom, everything that you learned in your many years, the experience that you have. I mean, does that mean nothing? Does that have no value because you look like you're 75?
Let's think about the alternative to aging. It is not a good one. It is a privilege to earn each and every year. I think of my grandmother. She lived to be 100 years old. And I also come from parents who were a lot older when they had me. My mom was 40 when she had me, my sister when she was 43. My parents were always older than everyone else's parents.
At the soccer field?
Yes. I think that's just given me a unique perspective on age because my parents are doing everything that they still can. My mom will turn 80 next year, which is a crazy milestone. And I just think that they have set such a precedence of showing that your age doesn't define you in number, and getting older is a privilege. I think of my husband's mom, my mother-in-law. She passed away just before I think she was 61. And having that happen just sheds such a light on what a privilege it is to get older, to watch your grandkids grow. Mm-hmm. We should all be so lucky to be a young spring chicken, a 71 of Connie Thompson.
So much of it is thinking about, as we talked about, your identity, who you are, what this means now, wherever you are in life, especially if you've made a transition or a change or the next chapter in your life. Connie actually meditates, and that is a huge part, she said, of her life, and it's helped to ground her sense of self, bring calm, and also gives her a moment to reflect because now she has time. So this question of, well, how do you use that time? What do you do? How do you prepare for your day? Here's what she had to say about that.
You hear this a lot now, be in the present, be mindful, mindfulness. It is, but it means something. And I stop myself many times a day. I built here something else you would be surprised. I kind of created my own little corner, my meditation corner, whatever you want to call it, where I just have my little space where I can sit, but I can also prepare myself for my day. When I remember to do this, and just be, this moment is a good day. My husband and I have our health. Whatever challenges, we have the capacity to take them on and to figure them out. But I work at it every day, and I remind myself that today may be a day that you wish you had back, because tomorrow or next year you might be in transitions you never dreamed of, and you want to be strong enough and healthy enough internally to handle what might lie ahead, because we never know.
Really deep. I mean, we talked about retirement, but when you break down the nitty-gritty, it's a lot of self-reflection. And I don't think you have to wait for retirement for that.
No, and it would probably be a healthy practice for all of us to start whenever we can. What I love about that is I've never done meditation. For me, it sounds like this big magical thing that some people have the key to, and I don't know how to do that. But what gave me some hope there is when she said it's something she's working on. It's a process. It's not too late to start. You can always start at some point. But I like how she talks about this being an ongoing process. Mm-hmm. She practices. She has set herself up in that corner where she has a dedicated space. And I think if you put some of those first steps, you've created the space, you've created a vision for what you'd like to do, and it comes down to practice. And so what I like that she said there is it's something she's working on. You don't snap your fingers overnight and voila, you're great with retirement and all the abyss that it poses to the rest of your life. But working on that and building the toolbox, because you don't know what happens in the next 6 months or the next year, and equipping your body, equipping your mind now so that you're strong enough, just like she says, you're strong enough for whatever is coming down the line next.
And the whole way through of our conversation, Kelly, there's this really strong tone of gratitude and appreciation. So it wasn't this whole, I've reached the finish line, ticker tape parade, nothing but sleeping in and golf for me. It was not that. It was very much an awareness and just this constantly being so grateful, not for retirement necessarily, but for everything in her life, and being grateful for the opportunity to understand where Don, her husband, is coming from. Oh, this is what you've been doing. This is what you've meant. And grateful for the time she has to reflect on herself. I mean, it seems like it's such a luxury for me when I hear her say that, because it's like, oh man, I wish I had all that time, the things I could do. But the reality is it only takes 5-10 minutes to practice what she practices. Mm-hmm. And I've started doing it.
Have you tried?
I'm a year and a half into meditating, yeah.
So what inspired you to start, and how did you break into it?
So a couple of years ago, right before COVID, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer. The year after that, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. My oldest child at the time was just starting kindergarten. It was a lot. A lot was happening at once. And I'm lucky enough to have my parents live here. We all live in close proximity, but at the same time, I'm juggling going to all the hospital visits with my dad, helping to navigate translation, language barrier issues. It was an interesting time. And so that's what really set me off, was I've got to find a way to reset, because I'm going crazy. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm going crazy. It's just feeling overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. And you start listening to, audiobooks and podcasts, and every little thing kind of led me to, let's try meditation. What is this about? It seems to be the salvo for everything. Well, like Connie said, it does take practice.
So you're a year in. How's it going?
It's great. How would I describe meditation and what it does? It's a mute button. It mutes myself. It mutes the voices in my head. Mm-hmm. You don't realize how much internal blabbing goes on until you realized, for 5 minutes, all I focused on and I was aware of was the 2 dragonflies flying in front of me. And for those 5 minutes, I wasn't thinking about my schedule, my day. I wasn't thinking about my pants are fitting too tight, and that goes down the whole slippery slope of everything else that happens when that happens every once in a while. It was just a wonderful pause of all the thoughts in my head, and just 5 minutes of that clarity, it recharges you.
When you were talking about Connie and you were talking about retirement and reaching the end of the race and crossing the finish line, when you cross a finish line, there's often a lot of noise. Hooray, congratulations,
Yeah.
party, wow. But what I really like about you describing meditation and how Connie described her journey of having time to reflect, I almost pictured the end of that race leading into a beautiful pasture, like a quiet pasture. You've gone through all the work and now you're in a place where you can think about it.
Yeah.
And hit that mute button. And hopefully we don't have to finish the race
Right.
before we can take a little sidebar and find that mute button. But it's something I would need to practice, and I think many would.
One of the things I found really interesting was when you start paying attention to the things you tell yourself, you realize they weren't all positive and leading you into healthy places or productive places. And Connie realized that too.
Is the story you're telling yourself true? And I bring myself back to that. Even like this moment when I'm dealing with, some house maintenance thing where I'm thinking, oh my God, it's a disaster. It's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars. It's like, wait a second, Connie, is that the story you're telling yourself or is that the truth? And I think that's an important little tool in the toolbox of transition, whether it's having a baby, life is different, lost the job. Is the story you're telling yourself about what's going to happen? Because we always think of the worst. Is it the truth? And then get back to, what can I do? And we are so able to do so many things that I have to not get myself paralyzed into, I can't do anything about it because I'm already trying to tackle the worst thing that could happen, which probably is not true, and find a way to tame those stories. Because the story you're telling yourself is usually far worse than the reality.
Tame those stories. Wow, right?
Yeah, that's a big one. It's like, when people go through things, you can spiral. You can spiral. And just like Connie said, you go to the absolute worst case scenario that it could all play out. When you think about all those worst things that could possibly happen, most of the time it doesn't happen all the way to that extreme. You've come up with every way it could go horrible, and it might hit in one or two of those spots, but it's not going to be the entire thing. And yet it's a coping mechanism because you're trying to prepare yourself of at least it won't be that. I'm prepared for A, B, C, D. And if it's just A in a coping mechanism sense, then you feel like you could at least handle that. In any transition, we got to rein in that little voice. We got to rein in the spiral. But that can be so hard to do.
So much of the time, we're on autopilot. I mean, let's face it, we're not even aware of what we're telling ourselves, and not even aware that you're listening to that music, that song, that whatever, those thoughts are always playing in the back of your mind. And you're not even aware because you're just so used to it. And, when she's talking about really step away and think about it and tame those stories, I just remember looking at her, Kelly, and thinking, this was about retirement and we got into so much more. Good stuff.
It is good stuff. And it's stuff that I'm glad that we can have this conversation, and she's reflecting back, and hopefully those are some of those nuggets that people can take and implement now.
Yeah.
Like Connie says, you don't have to wait until the end to implement meditation or taking a quick break and thinking about, are my priorities in line? Is the story I'm telling myself true? And take some of those big highlights that Connie hit and try and do that earlier because she had such great advice and such great perspective. I'm curious for you because I know that we talked a little bit about how Connie addressed having that label on her. She's the television journalist and what that meant to her. What has that meant to you to have so many people that you don't know and the first label they think of you is, oh, you're the anchor on KOMO. Is it an aspect, though, of the business and your job that you've been able to embrace? Or is that difficult, of people recognizing you and, having that be such a public definition of who you are?
I used to be more sensitive about it, but now I don't think about it as much. Hardly, if at all, because I'm so involved in whatever I'm doing at the time. If I'm not in the newsroom or on the set, I'm that person. I'm that screaming mom on the sideline. I'm like grabbing groceries at the grocery store. I'm fully in that moment, so I don't even think about it anymore.
Have you ever thought about what it would be like in retirement if that aspect went away?
Not necessarily in retirement, Kelly, but I have thought, well, if I don't do this anymore, what would I be? I have definitely thought about that. And the thing that threw me off was my kids are older and they like my work identity. They think it's cool. And that factor has never been a factor. And it's like, oh, well, would my sons think less of me if I didn't do this?
Well, they're proud of you, is what they are.
Well, they can, yeah.
They can be proud of you in a lot of different ways.
Being a mom is much harder than anchoring, so that should be the job that's giving me the most credit here. But I think we'll just adapt to whatever the next turn might be. And you too.
Yeah.
Because that's all the growth that Connie's talking about, right? Is to prepare us so that when we make that next jump, turn, leap, insert whatever metaphor here, you are emotionally and mentally strong enough to fully embrace it.
And what I think will be so great about this podcast is we're having conversations with people, and that decision comes in a lot of different ways. It's not just whether or not to retire. It's going in complete uncharted territory or making a decision that you're going to embrace the one thing that is most difficult to you in that moment. And so these conversations will give great context to people's lives in whatever way that challenge or opportunity or new door opening, however it manifests in life. I think that just like Connie's, allowing yourself some peace and thinking about these things ahead of time, a lot of great things that we can apply throughout all these conversations.
And I love hearing other people's stories. We have that in common.
We definitely
It's why we do what we do.
It is.
I'd like to thank Connie Thompson for sitting down with me and opening up and sharing her experiences.
How's she liking it so far?
She's loving it.
Of course. I love that. Hard Turn is a Sinclair podcast produced out of KOMO TV in Seattle, Washington. We're your hosts, Kelly Koopmans
And Mary Naum. Our show is produced and edited by Jordan Rizzieri and Brian Petrus, with engineering support from Adam Bronstein, Bill Fesh, and John Reynolds. Production support from Eric Newell.
For more information on the topics discussed in this episode and to stay up to date on future episodes, follow us on Instagram at Hard Turn Podcast and on X at Hard Turn Pod.
You can follow Hard Turn on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you know someone making a big change in their life? Share this week's episode. Your recommendation helps our show grow. So spread the word. Oh, girl. Did you not hear our conversation? Well, I could, if you wanted me to, I could recite the entire soundtrack for you.
Hard Turn was presented by Overlake Medical Center and Clinics.